excited today. I'm going to introduce you to Megan, who I met through a podcast. I don't even know how many years ago, Megan. Um, and then she's become a helper, a friend, I don't know, all sorts of things, but she's moved on in her life to new things. So, anyway, I'll start with her little bio. I'll explain who Megan is, and then we'll open up this conversation to talk about cholesterol because I see it a lot in the clients that I work with, and I've seen it in myself. And I just thought it would be a good conversation to bring to light today. So, introduce you to Megan Rath. Megan is a health consultant and nutrition coach. She's passionate about helping people achieve their personal version of optimal health and peak performance. She's worked with individuals all over of all levels in health and fitness, from professional athletes, and she's currently working with the Memphis Grizzlies, which is fun. So she can share more about that if she would like to. Her experience includes nutrition, gut health, sleep optimization, metabolic health, hormone balance, blood chemistry, interpretation. She received her BS in exercise biology and her MS in nutritional biology from the University of California, Davis, where her research focused on the effects of low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets and longevity and health span in mice. So Megan is an athlete, an endurance athlete. She understands this field, which is why I tracked her down years ago, because I find it hard to find doctors that understand endurance athletes, and reading all of their blood work and kind of talking to them in a different way. So by no means does she strictly work with athletes, but that is the reason I tracked her down, and I bug her every now and then to say, hey, is this right? Or what do I do? She is way more into the research and the science than I am. So I like to hear her talk and kind of give that feedback, that interpretation of things. So that is super helpful. And with that, I'll just welcome Megan, and then we will, I think, kind of just take an overview of what cholesterol is, what the basic testing is currently out there. And then we might open it up to some more conversations, but then give you options. So we'll kind of bounce back and forth. If you have questions, maybe just kind of put them in the chat or something, and I'll kind of monitor them and help along the way. So we want to keep it a bit conversational, yet get through some information for you. So welcome, Megan. Thanks for joining us in your busy day.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Emily, and everyone. Like Emily mentioned, I kind of have a couple of general like buckets of things I think would be helpful to talk about. Those include like talking about a cholesterol panel or a lipid panel on a blood work on a blood chemistry test, and exactly what we're looking at. These cholesterol can be just kind of this pie in the sky. Well, we talk about it, we don't exactly know what it is. So a little bit of education on that. And then maybe like what happens to our cholesterol level as we age potentially, and why that's occurring. And then we can talk a little bit about what to do. And of course, if you all have questions, comments along the way, please feel free. That's the fun of this. So does that
Yeah,
sound
and I
good,
just
Emily?
want to share, sorry to interrupt you, Meg. I just want to share a little bit where this idea came from for me. Again, sitting across from a lot of people that, get their cholesterol tested and start, specifically women, there's a drastic shift in cholesterol levels as they age and estrogen starts to drop. Certainly it affects men as they age as well. So we wanted to kind of leave this conversation open. It's not just strictly women, but there is, from what I see, and I think Megan, you can explain more, but there is a drastic shift for women. And I think, from myself, seeing it kind of shift without really, as you all know, like I'm pretty active, I eat well, do the things, and to see some of those numbers shift, it's quite alarming. And knowing also that the basic panel for cholesterol that they do on a blood test doesn't really give the full level of information. So I think that's, one of the biggest things I wanted to highlight today was that that there are other options. And if those numbers seem high or they continue to climb, or I want to educate you and give you the tools and the knowledge to advocate for yourself to get further testing. And, what does that even look like, right? For for people. So um, Megan, like she said, like she's going to take us a little bit through just like a basic panel, what that's for, cholesterol, those things, and then we'll get into, okay, well, what if those do come back a little elevated? What are my options? Because I'm finding a lot of clients to come and the doctors, you know, they have one answer for them, which is usually a drug. And, you know, from a diet lifestyle perspective, there are more tools, and two, there are further testing to do before you actually accept a medication. And we just want to kind of highlight that. So with that, Megan, take it away for the cholesterol, what it is and why we test it, how we test it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sounds great. And Emily, please feel free to hop in, interrupt as
It's
you.
always interesting interrupting people on Zoom, right? Because like when you're in person, you can like catch their eye. On Zoom, we just have to be rude and interrupt. Yeah.
Which
Sorry.
is fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so first, I just wanted to kind of talk about the difference between cholesterol and lipoprotein. So when we say like LDL, we're actually talking about the lipoprotein, but when we're talking about LDL-C or LDL cholesterol, that's the cholesterol within the lipoprotein. So cholesterol it's a fat-like substance that the body uses for hormone production, sex hormones, vitamin D, and also membrane health. So we think about it as it kind of has this negative connotation to it, but it really truly is important in, you know, a certain physiological range for us.
It's essential for life, right? I mean, if you didn't have it, we wouldn't be here.
Make cholesterol, and we
Mhm.
also will get some from our diets as well. And we talk about cholesterol on blood panels, but like I mentioned, we're not actually measuring cholesterol just floating around in the blood because it can't circulate on its own because of it has this fat-like structure. So this is where these lipoproteins come in, and you can think of them as basically cholesterol carriers or cholesterol transport proteins. So lipoproteins, which is the LDL and the HDL, those are the vehicles that transport cholesterol in the blood throughout the body. And there's many functions, but very basically, LDL is what delivers cholesterol to our cells to be used, and then HDL carries cholesterol to the liver for removal. And on a standard blood panel, it's the total amount of cholesterol within the lipoproteins that we're looking at. So an LDL of 100 milligrams per deciliter, if you're in America, that's the units that we use, means that there's 100 milligrams of cholesterol being carried by these LDL lipoproteins in 1 deciliter of blood. And as Emily kind of alluded to, cardiovascular disease risk isn't just about our total cholesterol or our total LDL cholesterol. It's also about the number and the size of the particles and also the function of them. So this is where something like an expanded lipid panel and looking at other risk factors can be really helpful. Specifically with respect to LDL, you can have the same amount of LDL cholesterol. So maybe let's call it 100. But one person has that 100 milligrams per deciliter of cholesterol in a small number of LDL particles that have more cholesterol per particle. And then the other person may have that same amount of cholesterol, 100, but it's being carried in a larger number of particles with a smaller amount of cholesterol per particle. And the individual with a larger number of LDL particles is going to be at greater risk of cardiovascular disease. Now that may have sounded a little bit complicated, but to simplify it and better illustrate, you can think of the LDL particles as like little boats on a river. And the more boats on the river, the higher, which means like the higher the number of particles, the higher the risk of the boats bumping into the riverbank, which is like the lipoproteins bumping into the artery walls and causing damage. Similarly, there are more particles to become oxidized, which ends up being a source of vascular inflammation. So,
So just to pause there for a
yeah.
second, Megan, just to clarify for them, like on a standard test where they test your LDL, your HDL, and your total cholesterol, you do not have that information of what she was just describing. You didn't. So that's where the testing gets a little bit confusing in that. You know, when doctors are just looking at those three numbers and they say, oh, you should be on a statin, or oh, you have a problem here, you want to say, hold on a second, I want to go to the next step and I want to know my particle size. I want to know like that. And there is testing for that. So you can figure out, what kind of, do I have this big fluffy kind or do I have these small dense particles? And that's what Megan's kind of referring to. So that's the next level of testing that if your doctor doesn't offer, you may want to advocate for, and that and I don't know if that was clear for everybody, but just clarifying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emily.
Mhm.
So, and like Emily mentioned, we can measure these better markers of risk, and those are markers like ApoB or LDLP, and these are subsets. You can think of them as like subsets of LDL cholesterol, and they're proxies for the number of problematic or atherogenic lipoproteins, and then also like the LDL particle number as well. So we can also run expanded lipid panels to look at the size of these lipoproteins to get a better idea of risk versus just the total HDL and LDL cholesterol on a
Right.
panel.
And given heart disease is one of the, well, is I think the leading cause of death for women, I believe for men too. It is something to watch, pay attention to, and ask for these extended tests, which is again why we're here today. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So that's cholesterol. Triglycerides are another important marker to talk about. And triglycerides are fat similar to cholesterol. And like cholesterol, they have to be transported inside these lipoproteins to circulate in the blood. And they can kind of be thought of as a measure of your stored energy in the blood, which is why we generally see triglycerides increase with caloric excess, with high alcohol consumption, with insulin resistance, and also with low levels of physical activity. So a blood
And
test is, go ahead, Emily.
I was going to say, and I feel like when I'm talking to clients, and this is a little bit of a misunderstanding, and that, like to hear what you have to say, Megan, is, people see high triglycerides and they think, oh, I need to stop eating red meat and I need to stop eating eggs because I think it's like part of cholesterol,
Mm.
and really it has to do a lot more with sugar,
Yeah.
alcohol, sugars, carbohydrates, those kind of things. And I feel like there's a disconnect there for people's understanding.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times, foods high in saturated fat are going to be more problematic for the cholesterol side of things. Those generally drive up LDL cholesterol, whereas triglycerides are more related to excess carbohydrates, particularly excess simple carbohydrates. If and that's relative to the amount that you're using. So if you're an athlete, you obviously need some carbohydrate for performance, for recovery. But if you're exceeding that, or if your body's having a hard time processing those carbohydrates, or maybe there's more alcohol consumption than there should be, then those are the things that we see generally increase triglycerides.
Yeah.
And triglycerides will
Yeah.
naturally increase after a meal. That's normal. But really, what we're talking about here is fasting triglycerides.
Yeah, that's important. I've had clients to send a blood test over or something and they didn't fast, and these numbers are kind of the cholesterol and triglycerides, right? They will there are certain blood tests that maybe are not affected by whether you just ate or not, and this is not one of them. This is largely affected. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And triglycerides, well, what are they a risk factor for there, or what do they kind of point to? What problems do they point to? Again, it's kind of that overall energy excess situation coming from carbohydrates mostly. And then also they elevated triglycerides in the fasting state. And elevated would be anything, I'll talk about reference ranges in a bit here. Probably anything in the triple digits. So 100 and above is considered elevated, versus like a standard lab is going to tell you up to 150 is normal. But insulin resistance is the other thing that you generally think about when it comes to seeing elevated triglycerides.
Mhm. Especially, again, midlife women are more susceptible to that. I
Yep.
see it. And I see it a lot with male clients that, alcohol or something is usually a little higher. But
Mhm. Now there's also ratios. So there's the actual LDL, HDL, triglyceride, and we're talking about basic panel here. Um, there's also ratios that can be important for further determining your risk. So the two ratios that are generally talked about are the total cholesterol to HDL ratio, and then the triglyceride to HDL ratio. So the total cholesterol to HDL ratio, if it's elevated, it is correlated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. And anything elevated would be a ratio of 3.5 to 4 at the high end. So that means your HDL is significantly lower, let's say 3.5 times lower than your total cholesterol.
Okay.
And then,
Megan, we have
yeah.
sorry. Is that a good spot to pause, or we want to finish that reference range? Sorry.
No, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. There's a bunch of questions that I thought maybe since we're on that topic, before you move on to the other ones that might, the name of the test to the size of particles, just like what test name are they asking for? I know
Yeah.
what I usually say, but I don't know if that's the
Uh,
correct.
sorry, what do you usually say?
I usually just say like an expanded lipid panel. Is that the
Yeah.
official name of that? Okay.
Yeah, so if you want to test one additional marker, I would test something called ApoB,
Mhm,
ApoB.
mhm.
And then if you want to, that's just one number. You get a number that can kind of tell you it's a proxy
And that's
for
a
your.
genetic, more of a genetic marker.
No,
Is what it
that
is?
would be like
No.
LP little a would be
Oh, right.
genetic.
Oh, right, right.
ApoB
Sorry.
is
Yep.
that's able to shift with diet and
Yep.
lifestyle. So that would be like number one if you were only going to test one other thing, and then a next step would be if you wanted to do like an expanded lipid panel. That would be
Mhm.
like the I think it's called from Quest, like their cardio IQ panel. It gives you the particle size and particle counts of your HDL and your LDL levels.
Yeah.
So it gives you more numbers, not necessarily more useful per se. The best marker that we have would be that ApoB if you were going to just test one more thing. But you could certainly do both. I think both
Yeah.
give you a really good amount of information to
But the
check.
biggest thing is to say to the doctor, I want an expanded lipid panel. I'd like to know more or be equipped with those. Yeah, the names of those. And then Kristen wanted to know, will you explain the relevance of particle number versus particle size?
Yeah, so they kind of go together. Um, because if there's generally, again, like I was talking about, if we're saying your cholesterol is 100 mil, or your LDL cholesterol is 100 milligrams per deciliter, that means that within a deciliter of blood there's that 100 milligrams of cholesterol, and it could be packed inside a bunch of small dense particles, or it could be packed inside a bunch of large fluffy particles. And if they're in the large fluffy particles, there's just more in there. But particle number is probably the more important of the metrics to look at versus particle size. That's also important. But particle number is important because, like I was mentioning with the boats on a river analogy, the more particles or the more boats on the river, that means the more the more risk they have of bumping into the river banks to become damaged, and also bumping into themselves to become damaged and oxidized. So it's really the particle number that I would say is the more important of the two.
Yeah. Somebody said, did you say over 100 for triglycerides?
Yeah, so anything double digits is in a good range. If we want to go a step further, for like even better um metabolic health,
Optimal?
I would say, yeah, ideally optimally less than 90. But if you're in the double digits, I would say that you're in a good spot.
In a good spot. And where should ApoB be?
Very very contentious topic. Generally we want to see it below 90. But it also depends on other risk factors. That the reference ranges, even for HDL, LDL, total cholesterol, those may also be dependent upon the person, upon the family history, upon other risk
Mhm.
factors, which we can touch on. Things like your inflammation markers, your HSCRP levels, which is a marker of inflammation, your fasting glucose, your insulin, your hemoglobin A1C, which is another marker of metabolic health.
Mhm.
Homocysteine is another marker of inflammation, specifically cardiovascular related inflammation sometimes. So there's other markers to look at, but generally I would say the consensus is below 90 for ApoB.
Okay. Okay. There are the questions that were
Okay,
related to what we're talking about then.
awesome.
Yeah.
So we talked about the total cholesterol to HDL ratio. You want that ratio to be less than 3.5, less than 4 at the very high end. Um, with respect to the triglyceride to HDL ratio, that one's associated with insulin resistance. So a higher ratio, meaning higher triglycerides and lower HDL, is associated with insulin resistance. And a high triglyceride to HDL ratio might also be predictive of LDL particle size. So a higher ratio being associated with the smaller particles, kind of like we just talked about. So even if you don't have the ApoB or particle
Hmm.
size, you can look at that triglyceride to HDL ratio and say, if you're above 2, if your triglycerides are more than double your HDL, that is probably predictive of higher risk of insulin resistance, higher risk of those smaller LDL particles.
Right. And from a dietary perspective, that picture would be somebody eating more of a carbohydrate rich, sugary diet, right? Versus, and not a lot of healthy fats like like avocados and salmon and, those nuts and seeds, those things that help increase that HDL. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And we also see, even in people who are eating a good diet, we also see high alcohol intakes
Yeah.
related to that high triglycerides and then the poor triglyceride to HDL ratio.
Right. Right. And again, I mean, hopefully, having a sense of what these numbers are, obviously, um, the hope is that you just know, you're aware that, hey, wait, I've heard of this stuff before, and you find a doctor, like if all these are high or seem out of ratio, or, you're finding somebody to help you decipher what the next steps are, that you don't have to memorize all this and know all this on your own. That the flag is raised when you see some of these things to ask for additional digging. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to know that if you just have your standard panel in front of you and you see, this is something that I see with a lot of my clients, and I'm sure Emilie does as
Yep.
well. You see, okay, you want the lab says you want your LDL cholesterol less than, maybe it's 90, maybe it's 100 milligrams per deciliter. That range is actually they're controversial ranges as well, but it can vary from lab to lab. So one lab might say you want it below 90, one might say you want it below 100, but let's just say you want it below 100 and yours is at 100, 105 or 110. In my mind, that would be not so much a cause for concern, but more of a cause for curiosity to say, okay, let's look maybe at your diet, or let's consider your family history, or whatever. Versus, oh my gosh, it's high, we need to act right now. There's a lot of other things
Mhm.
that we can do there, and we can certainly talk about what those things are to do.
Yeah. Yep. Again, this is just so you're armed with a little bit of information so that you can ask for additional testing, because the standard blood panel doesn't cut it in this department.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And before we get to what to do, uh,
Yep.
just a little bit about what happens as we age. So, in general, there's some evidence that the liver can become less efficient at clearing LDL from the blood. And then
Mhm.
sometimes we also see lifestyle changes. So we see dietary shifts in the amounts or quality. We see exercise and activity changes. We see insulin resistance, which can lead to some poor lipid profiling. So that's just in general kind of what we see is going on. And then specifically with respect to perimenopause and menopause, low estrogen is particularly problematic, and one of the reasons we see cholesterol start to creep up. So specifically, estrogen upregulates LDL receptors in the liver, which basically means that when you have a proper amount of estrogen, it's helping to clear cholesterol from the blood. Estrogen is also influencing the activity of certain enzymes that help process lipoproteins, and it also increases the liver's production of HDL as well. So when estrogen is dropping, we see all of those things that estrogen is good at, the body gets a little bit worse at.
Mhm. Yep.
So Emilie, do you think
And
now?
that's right. Yeah, just bookmark. Yeah, the women, and that's where like immediately, kind of as the estrogen drops, like a lot of women's cholesterol starts to go up. And I hear cases there, so what to do about it? And I see this question from Melissa. Most doctors don't dig in, or experts in this, or aren't experts in this area. Any suggestions? And so Megan and I will get into the, nutrition and lifestyle things that, you can put when you see this, to not panic and kind of put them into place, because there are things that can improve that we have to change, because yeah, the estrogen kind of took a dive, the cholesterol went up because of that. It doesn't mean like all hell's gone crazy. We can regain control over it. But we also want to be smart and watch it too, right? So um we'll get into that. Feel like I had something else to say there, but continue. Guess. Did
Pop in
anybody
here,
have
whenever.
questions with that? I mean, I know we do have a lot of women on here, and maybe you can talk to, it seems like that for men, it generally is more of a lifestyle question at this age, or kind of as they grow older, maybe not as much as the estrogen effect. Um, can you talk about stress, how that plays a role in
Yeah,
cholesterol, or does or
yeah.
doesn't?
So, directly, um, I actually don't, there may be a specific mechanism by which stress and
Hmm.
hormones and cortisol are like directly impacting your cholesterol levels. And Emily, if you know what that mechanism is, please share, because
I
I'm not
just feel that,
sure.
well, I guess more from an
Yeah.
inflammation level, I guess sometimes
Yeah.
is what I see more of. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're thinking about, well, why do we care about our cholesterol in the first place, right? It's a risk
Yeah.
factor for cardiovascular disease. But we have all of these other risk factors as well that kind of are playing cards with cholesterol, so to speak, to kind of create the overall picture of our
Right.
risk. So when we are stressed, that number one, that may kind of change our lifestyle and our dietary behaviors for the worse to make our lipid profiles not as good, right? So figuring out how to work around that. But also, yes, the stress that or the inflammation, or the pro-inflammatory state that chronic stress can cause, can absolutely kind of like play into your overall picture.
Hmm.
And that inflammation plus the cholesterol don't necessarily play good together, because it's not cholesterol per se that's problematic.
Right.
It's the inflammation and the oxidative stress, which is the
Right.
type of inflammation that is that's causing the vascular damage.
Right. I was going to say that was a good point to make, is that, the cholesterol itself doesn't cause heart disease. It's not the one thing, right? It has these other players that you then continue to look at, like gut health or inflammation levels, or, right, that we're kind of build the picture. This is sort of one piece of the puzzle that
Yeah,
comes into
absolutely. It's
play.
necessary. Like, we need the cholesterol for heart
Hmm.
disease to happen, but alone it's not sufficient. We need these other risk factors that are very much related to inflammation to be at play as well.
Right. Some questions over here. How do we support the work that estrogen does to clear the LDL if you are not taking hormones? Are there supplements to help with this?
Yes, yes. So there are, if we talk about, okay, cholesterol is helping to, or sorry, not cholesterol, estrogen is helping the liver to clear LDL cholesterol. There's things we can do with that. Estrogen is helping the liver to produce more HDL cholesterol, which is the quote unquote good type of cholesterol.
Mhm.
Side note, super elevated HDL cholesterol can also be problematic. So it gets even more complex than LDL good, HDL bad, or LDL bad, HDL good, and then there's these other markers to test. It's even within the context of HDL cholesterol, there can be too much, which can be a sign of problems. But yeah,
Mhm.
let's I have a whole list of things to think about with respect to like what we should be thinking about if our estrogen levels are naturally declining. How can we kind of use diet, use lifestyle, use supplements to support the role that estrogen
Right.
would naturally play? Um,
Right. And that's the important thing too. I mean, I know everybody wants to, and I'm glad Megan took a beat there to just say, like, supplement, we don't out supplement, like we still look at diet, lifestyle, exercise, like what things can we do to support or shift, from what we've been doing. And then on top of that, then you look into supplements. And, when I always get a little squeamish when, recommending supplements, because you always want to check in with somebody, right? Check in with a practitioner in this department, because there are side effects. Like when we get into, when we recommend some supplements, say magnesium or vitamin D, or, they're generally harmless. Most people don't, well, again, vitamin D can be excessive, but for the most part, people don't overdo them so much that it becomes problematic, at least from my experience. But when you get into some, like some ones that may be good for cholesterol or something, you kind of want to know what you're doing, because they do have more side effects and things. So I just want to, before we get into that, I just want to kind of blanket that we're not doctors. Talk to, the whole, all those statements that, we're not recommending this. We still do recommend that you check in with the professional, before taking these types of things, but that we do want to make you aware that there are other options besides going straight to, say, a statin, which is kind of the first step for a doctor, right? Some doctors, I know there's some that are great, but that there are some steps in between, and we want to educate you with that. But we're not saying by any means get off this call and go, look at your blood test and go buy a bunch of stuff and start taking them. So I just kind of want to blanket that before we get into that. Yeah. So, I mean, the first defense is always going to be diet. And, we are going to do another webinar specifically on, the number one thing to work on this with, which is fiber. And then Megan, you have some notes there. So I'll let you kind of share what you were
Yeah.
thinking there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're thinking about, well, what's going to be the lowest risk, the greatest potential return on our investment, dietary shifts, and it can be simple dietary shifts, would be the first thing that I would be thinking about. So specifically, or generally speaking, like a Mediterranean style diet. And Mediterranean style means different things to different people, but we can kind of
Mhm.
talk about the certain components of a Mediterranean diet that are specifically helpful for lipid profiles. So fiber, like Emilie just alluded to, is probably the biggest needle mover, specifically soluble fiber. So,
Mhm.
increasing soluble fiber can reduce LDL cholesterol. Basically, what fiber is, so the soluble fiber is doing is it's binding to bile acids and it's reducing cholesterol reabsorption. So, it's one of those things that kind of is helping when your estrogen is dropping. It's kind of, it's not taking the place of estrogen per se, but it is one thing that kind of can step in and play a similar role, so to speak. And
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I was going to say, I find, lately that the fiber conversation keeps needing to come back up again, because, the protein craze, right? Like, not to say we don't need protein, but, every micro and macronutrient have their moment in the sun every now and then. And, everybody's focusing on protein, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, I think, but, the question about, paying attention to your fiber, is, I don't think many people, like, when I even started tracking it, just to, when getting in prep for some of these other conversations I'm having, I'm like, well, what is mine? Right? Like, because I just assume I eat fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, I do the things, and then, and you think like, well, I get fiber, I get plenty of fiber, why would I even look? It's worth looking at. Right. It's worth looking at, understanding. And again, I'm going to do another webinar on fiber, so we can explain, go deeper into soluble and insoluble and what the difference is and what they're for. Um, but start looking at it and start seeing, like, a lot of foods. Like, I think I picked up a bag of nuts or something, and you think nuts and seeds have fiber. Well, it's like 1 gram or 2 grams, and we're trying to get 30, 40 grams a day. Right. So starting to pay attention to that would be by far, I think, too, the first thing that you start looking at for
Yep. I
cholesterol.
would absolutely agree. And there's other benefits beyond cholesterol of fiber, right? We're talking about glucose control as well, which is then feeds back
Yeah.
into your cardiovascular risk. So the nice thing about, some of these dietary shifts, are that they're addressing many things that we care about with respect to our health.
Yeah.
So I mentioned soluble fiber in particular. Good sources, and this is not an exhaustive list, but common sources of soluble fiber are going to be oats, certain seeds. So chia and flax are higher in soluble fiber, legumes, other whole grains beyond oats, root vegetables. And then, of course, you can get into the supplemental soluble fibers as well, things like psyllium, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, glucomannan, things like that. And but I would generally be trying to take a food first approach when
Hmm.
you can, and kind of aiming for if you do go and track this, because it really is the only way to know what your fiber intake is
Yeah. You
track.
just have to start reading the labels and just familiarize yourself, like,
Yeah.
because you think, oh, fiber's fiber and everything has it. And, like chia seeds, for example, have like 9 grams of fiber per serving, but hemp seeds have like 2 or 1 and not very many. And you kind of just, at least in my brain, oh, this, like, I know which foods have which, but still, in my own life, I was like, oh, well, I put hemp seeds in there. I don't need that. Or flax seeds. I thought, in my mind, flax seeds always like think about um, helping you go to the bathroom, but chia seeds have way more fiber than flax, right? Yeah. So start paying attention. It's interesting.
Yeah, and once you learn, just kind of like similar to protein, once you learn what foods are the best sources, you can just be on autopilot. You don't have to be tracking forever. But it is an interesting kind of experiment to run to see, okay, how much am I getting? And if we want to talk specifics for cholesterol specifically, kind of aiming for 10 grams of soluble fiber. Now, that's not total fiber, that's soluble fiber.
Right.
Um, a bowl of oatmeal is going to have some soluble and some insoluble fiber, which Emilie can go into in a future webinar. But 10 grams of soluble fiber per day, and kind of maybe split into 3 to 5 gram increments per meal. And it is most effective because of how it binds to bile acids and cholesterol in the GI tract. That's part of its mechanism of action. It is most effective when it's taken with food. Now, if you're eating chia seeds or oatmeal, you're probably eating it with another meal, so that just kind of works for you. If you are then
Mhm.
supplementing with a supplemental fiber, thinking about taking it with a meal versus on its own is going to be the best for cholesterol.
Yeah. Okay. Any
Okay.
questions there on fiber or how that works? Good. All right. We must be
Okay.
doing a good job.
Great. So, also within kind of the Mediterranean diet umbrella, we have healthy fats. So, specifically things like avocado, olive oil, especially extra virgin olive oil, or some olive oils are like designated. They test the polyphenols. Polyphenols are a type of anti-inflammatory compound that are in fruits and vegetables and colorful plants and olive oil as well. So you can get like high polyphenol olive oil, but generally just going for like the extra virgin olive oil is great. Nuts, seeds, fatty fish like salmon, those are great. Polyphenols, like I just mentioned, may not have a significant effect on like cholesterol itself, but because they are antioxidants, they can reduce oxidative stress and inflammation and lower the oxidized LDL in your body. And that's really the problematic type of LDL. Remember,
Mhm.
it's not the LDL that's the problem. It's when it becomes oxidized. So berries, pomegranates, green tea, cacao, the extra virgin olive oil, all of those are going to be herbs and spices, wonderful polyphenols to add in.
Right. We have one question that I see here. Maybe I missed it earlier. Can you speak to non-HDL that shows up on my blood test? What is
Mm,
that? And is total cholesterol marker more important than LDL?
yes. So I would say, well, to the first question, is non-HDL. Is that what
Yeah,
you're talking about?
non-HDL that shows up on it.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're talking largely about LDL and HDL and total cholesterol. There are other forms of lipoproteins, IDLs, VLDLs that I didn't mention because they're not that important to this conversation. You don't need to necessarily know about them unless you're super curious. But the non-HDL marker is the combination of all of the lipoproteins that aren't HDL. The LDL is probably going to be pretty close to that non-HDL marker, like if you look at the number, but the non-HDL is going to be higher because it also includes some of these IDLs and VLDLs and other the smaller amounts of lipoproteins.
Okay.
And
And
then
then, and is the total cholesterol marker more important than LDL cholesterol?
no, no, I would say I would if you are just looking at the basic panel, we don't have ApoB, we don't have that expanded panel to look at. I would say the LDL is your LDL, and then probably second to that, your triglyceride to HDL ratio are the most important to look at. And that is because your total cholesterol, you could have high HDL, which is probably a good thing, but that's your total cholesterol is all of your cholesterol, right? So it's that high HDL is boosting your
Gonna
total cholesterol up
influence,
even more. Yeah.
right? It's gonna influence that number. Yeah. So you kind of have to separate it out. Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely. So
All
last
right.
thing on the diet front for now would be considering your a reduction in saturated fat. So saturated
Mhm.
fat is not inherently bad, but certain types of saturated fat are notoriously good for causing elevated cholesterol in some more sensitive people. Not everybody is sensitive to saturated fat when it comes to cholesterol. Butter is kind of by far and away the biggest culprit. And again, not anti-butter, but it is
Such
something
a
to
sad
maybe
thing.
think about swapping out or reducing your amount of if you have elevated LDL, and then just seeing what happens, right? Other high fat dairy foods there seems to be some inter-individual variability there. So Emilie may be fine with full fat yogurt, and I may be not fine with it with respect to cholesterol. Coconut may be problematic. It seems to increase both HDL and LDL. But I would generally, if you do eat a lot of butter, a lot of fattier cuts of red meat, doesn't mean that you need to pull red meat out of the diet. In fact, it can be incredibly nutrient dense, great
Mhm.
source of iron and other B vitamins.
I mean,
But
how many times, Megan, have you gotten a client that they have high cholesterol and then they come to you and they're like, my doctor told me to not eat red meat.
yeah,
And then they're like, won't eat any red meat. And then they're only eating chicken. And you're like,
yeah,
this isn't
and then
working.
you're deficient in some nutrients.
And
Um,
chicken isn't necessarily like low in saturated fat, is it?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, if you do find yourself maybe you are going for like 85% ground meat, which is a fattier type of ground beef, or you're doing more ribeyes, you can swap those out for leaner sources. Um, and still get the red meat, but not so much the saturated fat. And the reason saturated fat is problematic for some people is it increases LDL production in the liver, and then it also can decrease LDL receptor activity in the liver. So it's decreasing clearance. So increasing production, decreasing clearance, you get more of it.
You have a picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, is ghee versus butter? Is one
I would
better?
same thing
Same
for
thing, right?
cholesterol.
Ghee is really just the fat of the butter. It's missing the protein. So you kind of it's the getting the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also worth mentioning here, and we seem to have, we as in the global we seem to have kind of come away or stepped away from talking about dietary cholesterol as problematic for blood cholesterol, but it really is not our dietary cholesterol for most people that's contributing to high cholesterol. So for example, shrimp, great source of protein, very lean, zero saturated fat basically, is high in cholesterol, but it's not going to be a significant contributor to your overall blood
Right.
lipid compared to something like a really fatty steak or something like that. And not even saying that those have to be completely
Right.
gone from
I
the
still
diet,
have,
but
I'm sure you do too. I still have a lot of clients that think they can't eat the egg yolk
yeah, absolutely.
because of
And
cholesterol.
yeah, yeah. And egg yolks are like they'll have a little bit of saturated fat, but it is mostly the cholesterol that people are afraid of within the egg yolk,
Yeah.
and they're incredibly nutrient dense with respect to
Right.
vitamin.
You need the egg yolk for your brain. Eat the egg yolk.
Yes. Great source of
We need
protein.
those too,
Yeah.
right? Our hearts and our brains. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we could talk a lot more about diet, but those are kind of the big big rocks. Exercise, both aerobic and resistance training have been shown to be helpful. We don't exactly know the precise mechanism by which exercise lowers cholesterol, but it probably is impacting the process of the processing of the lipoproteins in the liver. And then we get to some supplementation.
Mhm.
So fish oil can be good. It's mostly going to be best at increasing HDL and lowering triglycerides versus doing anything for LDL. But
LDL.
for some people, it does. You can
And
also
that's
eat.
pretty safe. I mean, that's one that we would say, you know, pretty harmless, right? And if you're, I get the question a lot, I'm sure you do too, of, well, I eat fish, so do I need to take it? And it's really a frequency question.
Yep.
And most people I know do not eat fish like 4 times a week or so. So most people need some sort of supplementation in that area.
Yep, I would agree. I would say if you're not doing, and it's not just fish, it's the fatty fish that's rich in omega-3. So your
Right.
salmon, small oily fish like sardines, trout can be a good source. Um, but it's not just blanket fish 4 times a week. You have to be eating the good omega-3 rich stuff at least 4 times.
Yeah. And
Otherwise I would just
and
avoid.
just I don't know if we have any. I don't think so on this call, just knowing most of you, um, that we have any vegans or vegetarians, but that idea that you can get the omega-3s from flax seeds or walnuts takes an enormous amount and the body has to convert it. Um, so yes, you need supplementation. And they don't love to take fish oil, but anyway.
Yeah, and
I
there
don't know
are
if we
like
want to say anything
the
about that.
algae
Are there
forms.
any vegetarians or vegans on here that we need to go deeper on that? Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't think so.
For those listening, maybe after this,
Yeah,
there are like
potentially.
the algal forms of fish oil, quote unquote, or
Mhm.
omega-3s. Will do the same thing to your HDL and triglycerides respectively. And that would be an appropriate source because you're getting the more concentrated form there.
Yeah, but getting it just strictly from the diet from that perspective
Correct.
is very difficult.
Very difficult. Um, a couple of other supplements, and again, like prefacing this with what Emily said before, not recommendations, things to talk to your physician about. Berberine can be helpful to reduce LDL cholesterol. It can also be helpful for insulin resistance and glycemic control. That said, it also has some antimicrobial properties, which you may not want to be taking something that's highly antimicrobial for a long time because we don't know what it's going to do to your gut flora, right? So all of these kind of comes with potential pros and cons. Um,
Mhm. And that's
plant
why I say you don't just leave this and go order it and take it for an endless amount of time, right? Our gut, it likes microbes. We don't want to get rid of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and with any of
Sometimes we do.
yeah, in certain scenarios, yeah, absolutely. With any of these interventions or supplements, I would definitely recommend trying it for a given amount of time, once you talk to your doctor about it. And that's probably 2 to 3 months. You'll probably see changes sooner than that, but you do it for a couple of months and then you retest and you see is this actually working versus taking something forever because, we mentioned it here. Or
More is better. Megan, that's a good point. I mean, you said ask your doctor. How many doctors, like, I mean, there are doctors that you'll say, can I take berberine instead of a statin? And they'll look at you like you have 8 heads, right? They're not going to give you a good answer, right? I mean, fair question. So there are other practitioners, obviously, that's what Megan and I do, and other, functional medicine doctors and other things. Like, so if your doctor isn't super open to these things, but I mean, again, given where you live, or hopefully you have a good doctor, they can be open to this.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And it's
Uh,
not their first line of defense usually, right? They're trained to prescribe. Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Different perspectives. Couple other
Yep.
supplements to consider. Soy isoflavones are actually phytoestrogens, and we think of phytoestrogens as being bad and problematic, but they're not all bad. Some of them absolutely have health properties. And
Mhm.
when we're talking about estrogen levels lowering, um, There's some thought, some indication that maybe something with some phytoestrogenic activity like soy isoflavones can be beneficial. And there's some evidence that they can improve LDL levels and also your endothelial function, so vascular function. Um, for perimenopause, menopause symptoms, there may be some benefit for hot flashes there. And you can get them through the diet, through soy, through tempeh, tofu, and then of course there are supplements as well.
Mhm.
Other ones to consider, plant sterols, red yeast rice, garlic, niacin. These are all things that I would say, depending upon the person, may or may not be recommended. Garlic's another one that's, antimicrobial if you take it in doses that are beneficial enough for cholesterol. So, tread lightly with all of these. Red yeast rice can have some negative side effects because there's a similar mechanism of action to statins. And so we do see some of the similar side effects as statins with red yeast rice. So just
Yeah,
those
I
natural
tried it. It
remedies are really
didn't quite work for me. Yeah. Yeah.
so real quick follow up. If you do see, and I would say consistently. So if you just have like one slightly high LDL reading or total cholesterol reading, don't, or even triglyceride reading, don't freak out. Maybe do a follow up test to see if you're consistently seeing those elevations, and then what
Mhm.
to do if that is kind of a consistent trend. One, more advanced lipid testing beyond a basic panel. We talked about ApoB. We talked about just kind of the expanded panel that's giving you lipoprotein particle in size.
Mhm.
Imaging can be beneficial. So, vascular imaging actually looks at like plaque deposition in your arteries. So,
Mhm.
um, something like a coronary artery calcium scan is going to be looking at hard plaque, whereas a CT angiogram or coronary artery angiogram is looking at both soft and hard. So that would be kind of best of the best imaging option.
Mhm.
I would test other risk factors as well. So looking at metabolic risk factors, which would be glucose, insulin or insulin resistance, hemoglobin A1C levels. Blood pressure is another one that is hugely important to vascular health as well. And then inflammatory markers like CRP, like fibrinogen, homocysteine, ESR are a couple that you may consider testing. Um,
Mhm.
I should also mention thyroid. So you need sufficient thyroid hormone levels for the LDL receptor in the liver to work and clear LDL from your system. So hypothyroidism is a cause of elevated cholesterol. So that's definitely something that you would want to kind of check off the list as far as it being a cause here. Um, and at the end of the
Which would
day,
probably contribute to I mean, hypothyroid is so common in women and
yeah,
menopausal women, then add the cholesterol. I mean, you can see the perfect storm.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And where to start, like we talked about a lot here, but start with diet and lifestyle, then
Mhm.
maybe move on to some strategic supplementation. Don't throw the kitchen sink at the problem, but be strategic about it, and get help with that if you can. um Obviously, so some additional testing, and then there's always the conventional route of medications if that's the route you choose to go. There's a time and a place for everything.
Yeah. And I think the biggest point is understanding that the basic blood panel that you get back may not be enough information for you to make some good decisions on your next step. That you're kind of now armed with a little bit more education and information so that you can ask for another level of support, um, for whatever picture you've got in front of you, that you don't have to memorize all this. I will send, a little bit of a follow-up. But again, I think you don't have to memorize the ranges and the things and all that. Just know that there is another level of testing that you want to ask for. Typically, I think, most as far as imaging, people aren't going to order that, unless you do have some elevated numbers. We all know how insurance works, but a calcium heart score is something that, people can pay privately for. I don't know about the coronary artery, but
Both
but the
both
calcium heart score is something that, people do, and I know I have clients that pay for it and get it done and just have an idea, um, of what's happening, because that doesn't get better, right? As far as I
It
understand.
can. I've seen
Um,
those get better.
oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
really what you're looking at with any kind of imaging is the change over time. So you don't want it to be
Right.
getting significantly worse over time. If you
Right.
have some plaque, many of us have plaque in our arteries, right? What we don't want is the progression of more and more plaque.
Regression of it. Right.
Yeah.
So knowing where you stand, some people, kind of do that. But from a doctor perspective, I don't think they'll order it without a problem first, because that's how their system works.
Mm.
But anyway, realize what time it is, and I want to respect everybody's afternoon and evening. So with that, are there any last minute questions that we could answer for you, or that you think the group would benefit from? Everybody's got their notebooks out. They have been studying, right, Julie? Session and Melissa. Yeah, some people have dark screens. I can't see what you're doing, but our little good students sitting in the front row with their notebooks. I love it. Thank you.
Me too.
So I did just, want to remind you that we do have a couple more webinars on the list, and we will talk more about the dive into the fiber and those things. Megan is she's a busy woman working for the Memphis Grizzlies, but she helps a lot with analyzing blood tests and works with clients and things like that. So I can pass along that information, and we will follow up. And if you need to dig further into any of this, and need Megan or I or both of us, we we're here. That's what we do. So I'm super happy to have you guys all show up. And even if you're watching the recording, we appreciate it. Megan, is there anything you want to say, or?
I don't think so. I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah.
This was great. Thank you everyone for the great conversation. Um, and thank you, Emily.
Yeah. Love it. All right. Well, you guys all go and enjoy the rest of your evening and have a nice night. And I'll see you again in a couple.